A nightmare weekend. Ferrari leaves the 5.278-kilometer Albert Park Grand Prix circuit in Melbourne with an alarming number of question marks and little time to find answers. The scenario that emerged at the end of the Australian Grand Prix weekend is far from the expectations that had been formed beforehand. In the span of 24 hours, namely between the qualifying session and the end of the race, a series of problems emerged, presenting a surprising picture, and not in a positive way. The performance of the SF-25 single-seater stands out, confirmed to be far from the McLaren's. After the first 27 laps, Charles Leclerc had accumulated a 36-second gap from Lando Norris, 19 seconds from Max Verstappen, and 6 from George Russell. The pairing of the SF-25 and the Albert Park circuit was already confirmed to be less than ideal in qualifying, and little changed in the race. But was the main issue setup errors? Poor feeling with the track surface, layout, temperatures? The conditions in which the Australian Grand Prix was held cannot be considered the best for drawing a representative picture, but many things did not work well. Ferrari team principal Frederic Vasseur emphasized that they had collected less than what the potential of their car would have allowed them, and this meant that, as a team, they had not done a good job. Pit calls cost precious positions and points. The strategists waited one lap too many to call in Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc when Liam Lawson and Gabriel Bortoleto went off track, going from a potential haul of 4th and 5th positions to 8th and 10th place in the final standings. Charles Leclerc commented that they would have to review their decisions, ensuring they made the right choice if a similar situation arose again. The communications between Lewis Hamilton and Riccardo Adami also seemed far from optimal, and the British driver's adaptation process to the Maranello team still seems to be a work in progress. In several ways, Lewis Hamilton's race seemed like that of a rookie, cautious in head-to-head battles and sometimes confused with new procedures. It is understandable. It's not easy to change after 12 seasons, but we are still talking about a 7-time Formula One world champion, and this is somewhat surprising. Lewis Hamilton confirmed that he had struggled with the balance, but that the race remained important because it had allowed him to learn more about the car in different weather conditions and to increase his experience working with his new team. The Sunday in Melbourne 2025 is the opposite of the Red Dawn of 12 months ago. Ferrari concluded the first weekend with a result to forget, with Charles Leclerc's 8th place and Lewis Hamilton's 10th, following a race where there were no encouraging moments, which further complicated in the chaotic final laps. Regarding this, the Monegasque driver reflected on a mistake he made, a spin, which, however, would not have changed the overall race outcome a lot, considering the pace of the SF-25 single-seater. For the Monegasque and Ferrari, the only positive note is the upcoming back-to-back race in China, where the Maranello team is already expected to provide important answers. The Sunday in Melbourne 2025 is the opposite of the Red Dawn of 12 months ago. Ferrari concluded the first weekend with a result to forget, with Charles Leclerc's 8th place and Lewis Hamilton's 10th, following a race where there were no encouraging moments, which further complicated in the chaotic final laps. Regarding this, the Monegasque driver reflected on a mistake he made, a spin, which, however, would not have changed the overall race outcome a lot, considering the pace of the SF-25 single-seater. For the Monegasque and Ferrari, the only positive note is the upcoming back-to-back race in China, where the Maranello team is already expected to provide important answers. A disappointed Charles Leclerc stated after the Australian Grand Prix that it had been a difficult race and that there were definitely things they needed to review and improve. The Ferrari number 16 driver initially focused on the strategic decisions made with the rain at the end, which had condemned the team to an even more difficult result to digest. He noted that things always seemed easier from the outside than they actually were, explaining that every situation had its peculiarities. However, he acknowledged that they had struggled more whenever such conditions occurred, adding that they were aware of this and were focusing more on it than on other areas. Charles Leclerc also expressed his disappointment over the mistake at turn 11, where he spun out. The Monegasque driver mentioned that the biggest mistake, which cost them many positions, was his exit at turn 11, where he lost the car, losing 4 or 5 positions. Charles Leclerc explained that the 8th place finish in the race followed a 7th place starting position in an equally disappointing qualifying session. He noted that this result was something Ferrari needed to put behind quickly, and change gears for the upcoming race at the Shanghai International Circuit. He added that he had nothing more to add, but emphasized that they would definitely need to work and that he had expected much better for a first race. While disappointed, Charles Leclerc mentioned that they would be back in the car in 4 days and hoped to make up for it. Despite the fact that the Chinese Grand Prix has not offered much satisfaction for Ferrari the previous year, he stated that racing on a real track would provide more concrete answers about the SF-25. The Monegasque emphasized their luck in having a race immediately after this one, noting that last year they had struggled a lot, but Shanghai was a proper track and they needed to do better. He mentioned that they would work from this starting point to try and improve moving forward. The season therefore started off on a tough note for both Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton, who described the race in Australia as one of the hardest days. After the enthusiasm that marked the British driver's early months with Ferrari, the first difficulties arrived in Australia for both the Maranello team and the 7-time Formula One world champion. He admitted at the end of the Melbourne race that it had been one of the hardest days, explaining that being in those conditions for the first time with rain, the car, and the power unit, along with the new communication with engineers, had been an enormous challenge. He continued by saying that it was a shame because he had hoped for more that day and had held on as long as he could. At one point they had been in a position to fight for the podium, but then the rain came, and the situation worsened. Despite this, he did not express alarm, stating that they had not brought the car into its window and did not think it was far from what had been seen in qualifying and the race. The Briton believed that they had not managed to find the car's performance this weekend. Beyond the lack of performance, the factors that shaped Ferrari's race were the strategies made toward the end, when rain returned to Albert Park. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton stayed out on hard tires, while all the other drivers switched to intermediates. This decision penalized the 2 Ferrari cars, forcing them to pit a lap later than the others. The safety car caused by Liam Lawson's incident further worsened the situation, relegating the SF-25 cars to 9th and 10th places. Lewis Hamilton did not appreciate the calls from the pit wall, and in a team radio directed to track engineer Riccardo Adami, expressed that they had been told it was not going to rain much and that they had missed a big opportunity. He later apologized for the radio message. Ferrari hopes that what emerged from today's race is actually a verdict influenced by atypical weather and track conditions. In a few days, it will be time to fire up the engines again at the Shanghai International Circuit, hoping to regain the performance seen on Friday in the 2 free practice sessions. Such a scenario cannot be categorically ruled out. China could bring different values on track, but as the evening falls in Melbourne, it is clear that the second race on the calendar is already a crucial test for the Italian side. Probably the Ferrari seen in the Australian Grand Prix is too bad to be true. Many factors weighed on the final balance, and some of them could indeed be mistakes from the race. The goal, however, remains McLaren. If, before the Australian weekend, it seemed like everything was in place for an equal comparison, after the 57 laps completed today at the Albert Park circuit, the feeling is that there is ground to recover. China will show how wide this gap is, whether it can be closed, or if a dramatic shift in seasonal goals will unfortunately need to be considered.